The vaccines are coming into Nigeria in just a little bit, and you have already taken your vaccine, the first dosage at least. What do you know so far about this vaccine?
Yeah, so I got the Moderna vaccine about 3 days ago, and the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccines are this new class of vaccines where they take an mRNA molecule, which is basically a molecule that tells the body to produce a protein that the virus expresses on its surface. And our immune system recognizes this foreign protein and creates antibodies against it. And these antibodies are what gives us protection or immunity against the virus. And so I got this vaccine 3 days ago. And the only experience I had, the only side effect I had was soreness in my arm. And so right now, for the next couple of days, my body's creating antibodies against this viral spike protein. And once I get my second dose in about 3 weeks, then I would have achieved sort of maximal immunity against the COVID-19 disease.
Wow. That sounds very interesting. I'm going to take you back just a little bit. Bill Gates predicted that the death rate in Africa would be tremendous. But as a matter of fact, that has not been the case. Africa currently still counts as the lowest rate of the COVID-19 virus. What are your thoughts on that? And if that prediction didn't come out, why do you think the vaccines will be of use to Africa?
Yeah, that is a great question. So the fact that the COVID-19 has not been so prevalent in Africa is actually a huge question of research. It's something that people are trying to figure out. And there's a lot of factors that or a lot of hypotheses that are swirling around right now, including the fact that, one, some people believe that there may not be as much testing being done in Africa, and so perhaps the numbers are artificially low. But then there's also other hypotheses out there. Perhaps there's the weather, the fact that most African countries have a younger population, and we know that youths are less affected by COVID-19 in terms of mortality. And then there's other factors as well, such as the weather or immunity to other viruses or other pathogens that people may have from earlier exposures to diseases. And so the fact that those predictions didn't pan out is actually a huge question in scientific literature, and it's something that people will be looking out for and doing research on, why COVID-19 has not ravaged the sub-Saharan Africa as much as it has other countries. Now, when it comes to the vaccine, I still think it's important to vaccinate and provide protection to populations because we know that COVID-19 is deadly and there are deaths. People have been dying from COVID-19 in sub-Saharan Africa. So I think that the vaccine has been rigorously studied in multiple clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, and we know that it has significant protection against COVID-19. And you never know what the next waves of this virus will be. And so despite it not being big right now in sub-Saharan Africa, I think providing long-lasting protection to your populations is the way forward to ensure people's safety.
So, Chidi, I have been chatting with a number of people as well as those following COVID-19 Digest, and some of their concerns are the safety aspect of it. Different people have had adverse reactions to them, some including death, some of them paralysis, blindness, and whatnot. What are your views on that? And should you be taking certain medications, well, in the vaccination that could have adverse effects if it's totally not necessary?
Yeah, so I have not heard of any adverse reactions that include death or blindness. I can tell you that the most common adverse effects that people have are headache, fatigue, fever, muscle cramps. These are all adverse events that actually tell you that the immune system is working to produce antibodies against the viral spike protein. These are adverse events that we would expect for this sort of vaccination. Now, when it comes to more serious adverse events, at least a study came out in the U.S. that of the 2 million vaccinations that have been given in the first 2 weeks of the efforts being done, about less than 1% of people had the most serious adverse event that we know, called an anaphylactic reaction. That's an extreme allergic reaction to the vaccine. Now, people who develop this adverse reaction are predisposed to have allergic reactions to things like peanuts and other sorts of foods, and so we know that this is a risk factor. But in terms of serious adverse events, this is not something that we've been seeing in the U.S. That being said, it's still important to know that if you get this vaccine, you could experience the muscle aches, the fatigues, the headaches, and that this is something that is expected and tells us that your immune system is working.
Now, in terms of the duration for these vaccines, other vaccines in the past have taken longer times to, be mass produced. With this vaccine, a lot of them have not completed the proper stages of trials, but already people are already being vaccinated. What is the rush, and why is this vaccine available so readily, regardless of the normal time span we have seen when it comes to other vaccines?
Yeah, that is a great question. So one thing that I want to dispel is that these new mRNA vaccines have been somehow rushed. In fact, the research into mRNA vaccines have been going on since the 90s.
Yes.
And so we've had the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s where people were doing research into this technology. Now, when the COVID-19 broke out in January and February, scientists around the world immediately got to developing the technologies and doing the research to get a vaccine up and running.
Yes.
And so the research was definitely expedited with a lot of money pouring in, but that's because we were dealing with our first 21st century pandemic. And so there was a lot of effort being done to expedite the research. Now, when it comes to the safety, the studies from the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine have gone through rigorous phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trials. And these vaccines have been what we describe as being emergency use authorized, meaning that they have been authorized by the FDA and other agencies around the world to use in a pandemic because the benefits of vaccinating people far outweighs the cons, which is, people unnecessarily dying from COVID-19. That being said, I understand that people would feel like this vaccine is rushed. It came out in a year, but the proper safety protocols have been put in place to ensure that this vaccine is protecting people and not causing undue harm. But there will always be more research to look at long-term side effects and potential long-term side effects and things like that.
Among other concerns, I have been speaking with people, virologists and citizens of Nigeria, and some of the concerns are in 2009, the Pfizer pharmaceutical company was in a lawsuit with the Nigerian government for the polio vaccines that had adverse effects on children in Kano and mainly the northern part of Nigeria. Forgive us if we are a bit skeptical to trust this same pharmaceutical company to administer another one. Also, as you know, Africa has been known and rumored to be the testing ground for unsafe medical practices. Why should Nigerians and Africans take this vaccine when our rates are not as high as other countries, given our history?
Yeah, that is a great question, and it's no surprise that people have a distrust to Pfizer and to other pharmaceutical companies in the continent because of the long history of human testing. And the same could be said in Black populations here in the United States, where there's also a long history of the medical community sort of treating the Black population as guinea pigs. And so I want to acknowledge that the distrust is real and it's warranted. When it comes to these vaccines, there have been people who have made it their mission to ensure that the people who are involved in the clinical trials of these vaccines are actually representative of the U.S. population. So it included Black people, included people who are Hispanic, and included other minorities. And so that when the data from these vaccines come out, you can then confidently say that this vaccine works and is safe, not only for white populations, but for the other populations that have been included. Now, the vaccine trials have not been conducted for the most part, in sub-Saharan Africa, so there hasn't been any real testing in that way. So people shouldn't feel that this vaccine has somehow been tried on Africans as a sort of a testing ground. But when it comes to whether or not you should take the vaccine, I really think it's up to the public health officials in different countries to explain their risks and benefits and say, hey, if you're properly wearing masks, if you're following social distancing protocols, if you're washing your hands and you feel like you're able to be safe, no one is going to force you to take the vaccine. But if you want sort of a longer term protection from this virus, if you want a longer term ability to keep you and your family safe, then this is the only way that we know how to do this right now in medical.
I like the fact that you mentioned the mandatory aspect of it. Spain has put a watch list for persons who have refused to take the vaccine. Why exactly is there so much focus on that? I mean, if people are able to stay safe and the vaccine is just an option, do you think that we might see that same operation happening here in Nigeria? And what is the ulterior motive? I have spoken to researchers, historians, and concerned citizens of planet Earth, and the fact that it might be mandatory is a source of concern.
Yeah, I understand why that would be a source of concern. I think if I were to put my head into play, if I were to think about what the people who are saying this should be mandatory thinking, my thought is that vaccines are really the only way that we can provide long-term safety against pathogens in a population. So smallpox, for instance, that is a disease that we no longer see on Earth because we vaccinated at one point in our history nearly everybody on Earth. Same with polio. We don't have, for the most part, epidemics of polio happening in countries all around the world because of the vaccination efforts that happened in the 50s.
But we did have deaths. We did have deaths in 2009 from that same vaccine.
Yes. There will always be sort of adverse events and issues that come up with vaccines, and that is something that scientists, health officials, and politicians should be on the watch for, and also providing accountability. But when it comes to sort of providing long-term, long-lasting protection against pathogens, vaccinations are the way forward. And so I am not personally in favor of mandating vaccines because I think everyone has should have the choice to decide what goes in and out of their body. But when it comes to protecting society and humanity as a whole, this is the tool that we have. And so it makes sense that people would be promoting it as long as there's adequate safety.
So I'm going to give you another case study. Tanzania, just a couple of months after the novel coronavirus had its grip around the world, the Tanzanian government declared Tanzania coronavirus free. And as a matter of fact, we have not heard of high rates of death. We haven't even heard of a number of cases, and there have been one or two, but those persons were actually outside the country when it happened. One of the singers called Mwana Efe. So what would you make of that? Why are there no cases there? Why are people not dying? So why should Africa get this vaccine if we have other alternatives?
So the first question I would have, and to be fair, I have not seen the Tanzanian data, but when I hear that a country declares itself coronavirus free, that is an extraordinary claim that needs extraordinary evidence. And so I think I would need to see, and we would need to see how often the country is testing people, what are the tests that they're using, and how frequently, and how widespread is their testing. Because to say that a country is coronavirus free, you would have to actually have tested everyone in your country and say there's 0% of cases of COVID. So that's point number one. But when it comes to the death rate, again, that is a question that that scientists around the world are really asking for why death rates are so low in sub-Saharan Africa and parts of South Asia and Southeast Asia. Clearly, the virus is having a disproportionate toll in the more developed nations and the West. And again, like I said earlier, one of the theories is that those populations are higher in age, and so we know that COVID is more deadly for people who are 70 plus. And then there's also comorbidities that would be interacting with COVID-19 and leading it to be more deadly.
Now, if the vaccines are truly one of our best options and hope for a safer mass population, just like the world governments have taken the pedestal and have taken this vaccines live and, on camera for the rest of the world and their citizens to see, do you think that the Nigerian government should follow suit? And if you are of that opinion, who should take these vaccines, and why exactly should we do that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Like you mentioned earlier, and like we've talked about, distrust and mistrust is real, especially among populations that have had histories of being exploited by pharmaceutical companies and by nefarious actors. And so if you want to build trust in your communities, if you want to build trust in your populations for people to take a new vaccine, then it's imperative, I think, to see leaders, role models, people in your community that you trust taking the vaccine. That's why I actually took the vaccine and sent it to my family in Nigeria to say, hey, this is me taking the vaccine, and I'll keep you up to date about how I'm feeling and whether or not there's any side effects that happens. I think when people see that people they love and people they trust are taking the vaccine, then their skepticism and their fright and their natural fright goes down. And so if I were to suggest people to take the vaccine in Nigeria to show the population that it is safe, I would think of governors, I would think of the President Buhari, I would think of, local religious leaders, community leaders to take the vaccine.
Thank you so much, Chidi, for that expose, and we wish you the best on your second dose of the vaccine.